Hello. This is a speech given by Tasha A. McCarter, PE, PMP, Vice President of Clean Tech Innovation at RWE. Tasha was a keynote speaker at the 2025 IEEE Power Africa Conference in Cairo, Egypt. Here is the speech, titled Beyond the Echo Chamber: Diversity as the Engine of Innovation. I am honored to be here and excited to talk about topics I'm passionate about: diversity, innovation, and renewables. If you follow US news, you will know that these topics have become especially controversial in recent months. And although controversial, they are no less important. As a matter of fact, I would argue that diversity is even more important as countries compete for the top position across the globe. So I'd like to begin with a story. I watched brilliant Nigerian developers get rejected while mediocre Stanford grads got hired. Let that sink in. At the time, I was recruiting for a tech startup. We need senior developers, they said, the best talent. I introduced them to Nigerian engineers who'd built payment systems serving millions, who'd created logistic platforms with duct tape and genius, who'd learned to code with pen and paper because consistent electricity wasn't guaranteed. They don't have the right background, the hiring manager said. That same month, they hired 3 Stanford grads who couldn't debug their code. The Nigerians I recommended, one now runs engineering at a unicorn. Another built a fintech company, processing $50 million monthly. The third, teaching at Columbia. But back then, they weren't the right fit. Now, although I cannot take full credit for that story, I have seen this exact same scenario play out in my workplace, time and time again. Here's what the West refuses to see. When you learn to code through power cuts, you build differently. You architect for resilience, not just speed. When you develop on 2G internet, you optimize in ways that developers with fiber would never understand. When your bandwidth costs more than your laptop, you learn efficiency that makes Silicon Valley's move fast mantra look wasteful. No, these developers did not have Stanford degrees. They had something better: constraint-driven innovation. See what the West doesn't understand about Africa. You are not trying to be the next Silicon Valley. You are building something that can't be imagined. Africa has 70% of its population under 30, the youngest continent on Earth. So while Silicon Valley optimizes for an aging population, you're building for a future they haven't seen yet. Your developers don't need ping pong tables and free kombucha. They need consistent electricity and affordable internet. And when they get it, they build solutions for 1.4 billion people, not just 1,400 employees. The future won't look like Silicon's past. It will be built by founders who turned rejection into rocket fuel, those who learned to build without permission, fund without approval, and scale without Silicon Valley's blessing. The future needs builders who've survived constraints, not just enjoyed conveniences. So I ask, what talent are we overlooking while worshiping the right credentials? See, I'm convinced that the future needs diverse talent who see beyond pedigree. When everything works, you optimize. When nothing works, you innovate. And here's my message today: constraints, whether in our circuits, our projects, or our careers, don't suppress innovation. They ignite it. I want to share with you why I think constraints spark innovation and brilliance. We all live inside boundaries, whether it's the constraints of physical laws like voltage, current, or bandwidth, safety code rules like what we see in the International Electrical Code or in the US, the NFPA 70E or OSHA, or it could be the limits of market realities that drive budget ceilings, deadlines, or supply chain gaps. And finally, constraints can come in the form of personal realities. Maybe you don't even have the pedigree, the PhD, the decades of experience. But history shows us it is often those without the expected credentials who see the possibilities that the experts miss. For instance, the Wright brothers weren't professors of aeronautics, they were bicycle mechanics. Their lack of proper credentials meant they asked the naive, fundamental questions that the academic establishment dismissed. And guess what? They were the first to fly an airplane. Claude Shannon, the father of information theory, was a tinkerer. He filled his dorm room with gadgets and toy robots. His playfulness with noise and bandwidth limits laid the groundwork for the electronic communications networks that now lace the earth. And our field of electrical engineering? Many of the radical ideas, like replacing vacuum tubes with semiconductors and integrating renewable generators into grid codes, came from people working outside the mainstream. Constraint flips the script. When the experts say that can't be done, it often takes someone without the weight of conventional wisdom to say, why not? So, why is this topic important, especially right now? By a show of hands, how many of you within the last 12 to 18 months have experienced reorganizations, restructuring, transformations, any other language that represent change within your place of employment? If you have been in the workforce as long as I have, you would see that the times between these types you would see that the times between these types changes you will see that the times between these changes have increased in frequency and scope. Think about the last 2 decades of technology induced disruption. We've gone from the rise of the internet to mobile, to cloud, and now AI and automation, each cycle compressing in time. The half life of advantage is shrinking. What used to give companies a decade of leadership may now last only a few years or even months. And here's the kicker. Customers are no longer just comparing you to your direct competitors. They're benchmarking you against the best experience they've ever had anywhere. So if Amazon or Apple sets a new bar, then that becomes your bar too. And capital markets are shifting as well. It's no longer just about operational efficiency. Investors are rewarding companies that can learn quickly, adapt under pressure, and bounce back from setbacks with resilience. By a show of hands, what's the average life of a company today? Is it 30 years? 20 years? 10 years? According to the S&P 500, the average life in the 1920s was 67 years. Today, it's between 10 and 20 years. In order for companies to survive, they must always become ambidextrous or have the ability to balance the trade-offs of being efficient with strategic exploration. Now, efficiency is critical, but efficiency without innovation leads to margin compression. If you're only cutting costs, eventually you hit a wall. Even worse, moving too slowly compounds risk. Every delayed decision, whether it's a platform upgrade, fixing data quality, or tightening cybersecurity, creates technical, regulatory, or reputational debt that costs exponentially more later. And talent, especially your best talent, will not wait. People want to work at companies that feel future ready. If they sense you're stuck in the past, they'll move to where the energy is. Given these market dynamics, why don't more organizations respond faster? In my experience, 7 barriers show up again and again. Metrics that favor certainty and utilization over adaptability. For instance, KPIs that include percentage complete of activities that were identified way back in January versus those that measure how quickly you're able to pivot and ramp up on new market driven activities. Number two, siloed budgets tied to rigid annual cycles. I'm referring to that once a year budget forecast that has no margin for uncertainty. Three, compliance fear and risk myths that paralyze decision making. We usually see this in rigid top down cultures where every decision is by committee and everyone is concerned with CYA. If you don't know what CYA is, ask your neighbor. Fragmented data that slows down every initiative is number four. This is a huge problem in siloed organizations that are not customer oriented. I've been in organizations where every team has their own tool of choice, and APIs have to be integrated to share information across the project lifecycle. Five, decision latency. Too many gates, too much waiting for sign off. This one burns me up. You have made a slide deck just to get approved to make a slide. Number six, talent trapped by role design instead of being empowered to stretch. Job rotation opportunities are critical to building high performing teams. Not only do employees get a chance to learn other parts of the organization, but it helps with building adaptability. Seven, and finally, success in theater, where activity masquerades as progress. I know we've all experienced that one person who always claims to be so busy. Sometimes I feel like saying, bro, cut it out. You can't be that busy. Now let me be clear. The goal isn't to abandon those well-earned competitive advantages. It's to become ambidextrous, to defend the core while building for the future. Put simply, the world isn't slowing down. The cycle times between disruptions are shrinking, and the half life of advantage is falling with them. The organizations that thrive won't just be the most efficient, they'll be the ones that build systems to renew advantage repeatedly, balancing discipline with exploration and certainty with optionality. That's the challenge in front of all of us. And it's also the opportunity. Let me share with you 5 repeatable ways constraints can become your unfair advantage. 1. Fix the target, free the path. When you commit to an outcome, everything changes. Take engineering, for example. If your requirement is incident energy less than 8 calories per cm squared or latency under 1 millisecond, you fix the target. You've locked in the goal, but the path, that's wide open. That's when unconventional solutions emerge, often from the people who don't have 10 years of this is how we've always done it. They see shortcuts that others overlook. 2. Invert the constraint. When something is scarce, ask what's abundant. No budget? Great, you're free from sunk cost bias. No pedigree? Even better, you have no rules to unlearn. History is full of these flips. Limited motherboard space, inspired 3D chip stacking. What feels like a weakness often hides the seed of breakthrough. 3. Move the boundary. Innovation isn't just about solving problems, it's about redefining where the problem sits. What happens if safety responsibilities shift? What happens if safety responsibility shifts from PPE, personal protective equipment, to arc flash mitigation and design? What happens if computation shifts from the cloud to the edge? What happens when decision making shifts from the senior engineer to the new hire bold enough to propose the radical idea? Sometimes progress is just a boundary. It's just a boundary shift away. 4. Spend one resource to buy another. Constraints force trade offs, and those trade offs fuel creativity. In engineering, we add redundancy to gain safety. We trade computation to save power. In careers, we expend courage to earn opportunity. If you lack experience, you can trade curiosity, and curiosity will buy you insights others miss. The trick isn't to eliminate trade offs, it is to master them. 5. Make it software, but only where safe. When budgets are tight, adaptability wins. Programmability lets you experiment cheaply, and iterate fast. And this is where people without pedigrees often shine. They're not guarding sacred analog solutions. They're willing to try, test, fail forward, and in that process create breakthroughs. The rule: make it software where adaptability matters, but always respect places where safety and physics demand hard tech. So, in closing, here's my challenge to you as engineers, leaders, innovators, and builders of the future. Redefine constraints as launchpads, elevate the voices without pedigrees, practice constraint on purpose. If we do these 3 things, we won't just survive disruption, we'll thrive in it. The next world-changing breakthrough may not come from the person with the longest resume or the most credentials. It may come from the one with the least to lose and the most to imagine. Because history belongs not to those who had everything, but to those who turned their limits into launch pads. What table will you build, and who are you going to invite to sit at it? I am convinced that diversity will prevail. That ends the keynote speech, and I am Urena Onyewuchi, PhD. I am the founder of aprofessionalafrica.com, where we unite professionals around the world and job seekers to be well-rounded professionals. I hope you visit aprofessionalafrica.com today. Thank you.